totally thrilled to welcome Minerva Cuevas and Kerry Doyle for this conversation. I learned about the migratory project on a field trip we took for our regional collaboration that's called Deserto Mountain Time. And we took a busload of people, a combination of partners and members of the public, to visit museums in Las Cruces, El Paso, and Juarez. And we had the great fortune to get to see Migratory when it was up at the Rubin Center for the Visual Arts at the University of Texas at El Paso, which Kerry organized with Minerva. So we're going to hear a lot more about that process. I'm so happy that they both were willing to bring it to Albuquerque. It just seemed like a show that really needed to get as wide an audience as possible. So we're really happy to be able to share it with more people and also add some local content as well. We did a local version of the Migratory Yellow Pages, which involved a call to artists and a process of putting together a Yellow Pages book for new migrants and refugees as sort of a first aid kit of helpful information to use on their journey. So that Albuquerque version is in process, and I do need to thank our funders. There's so many generous funders. We're so lucky. The Henry Luce Foundation has contributed to the upstairs show, and the downstairs show is made possible by the New Mexico Humanities Council with the National Endowment for the Arts, and New Mexico Arts, a division of the Office of Cultural Affairs, as well as the National Performance Network. And then I'd just like to thank our general funders for 516 that help us make all this happen. The City of Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Community Foundation, the fund there, the Lannan Foundation, and two local corporations, P&M Foundation and Bank of America also. One of the really important things about this project is the idea of collaboration and partnership. So I just really want to extend huge thanks to Kerry Doyle, who's the director of the Rubin Center for the Visual Arts, for helping us to bring Migratory here and being such an amazing partner and mentor and collaborator. And I'm going to let Kerry introduce Minerva. It's a great honor to have you here. So without further ado, please welcome Kerry and Minerva.
Nice to see all of you here this evening. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here at 516, and just kind of want to say right back at you at Suzanne, because 516 Arts is one of our regional partners that we feel shares a lot of the ethics that we think are most important in the presentation of contemporary art, and that is to be grounded in a local community but be involved in an international conversation. And that's something that I've always really appreciated about 516 Arts under Suzanne's leadership, is that they manage that balance so well, and it's something that we aspire to as well. And of course, it's an enormous honor to be here tonight with Minerva Cuevas, who is a friend and a collaborator and an artist that I've admired for a long time, very much because of the way that her practice operates in between, like, sort of the ethics and values of the contemporary art world, in which she excels, and she's internationally renowned, and I don't have to say much more about that, but also between the ethics and the practice of engaged relationships with the community. And it's a very difficult balance, I have to say. We aspire to that as an institution. We work with a lot of artists that aspire to that, but I've very rarely met anyone that hits the mark on that as much as Minerva Cuevas does, with the respect for the people that she's working with and the topics that she's addressing, and the kind of very particular focus that someone needs to both register in the international contemporary art world and at the same time register at a level of ethics of relationships in social and political practice. So for me, this particular event and the relationships are hitting all the marks in what I aspire to as a professional. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, Minerva. So thanks for being here. Yeah. So our goal tonight is to talk to you a little bit about the show Migratory, so that you get a little bit of understanding of the history and the context of the show and how it came together. And hopefully we'll take you right up to the point of how it got here till 5:16, and then we'll let you enjoy the show itself and invite you to kind of engage in conversation with us afterwards. But I wanted to start with just asking you in a very open-ended way, Minerva, if you could tell the story of Migratory. I'll preface it slightly by saying that we have always been interested in working with you as an artist, and we had some guest curators who kind of presented the possibility of you working at the Rubin Center in the beginning of 2019, which was so long ago, right? When you think about all the things that have happened since then. We did an initial research visit to the border in August, September 2019. It was a very different world at that time. But tell me a little bit about your introduction to the border and kind of the seeds that were planted for the project that would eventually become Migratory.
Hey, thank you for being here. Yes, the process, of course, was interrupted by the pandemic, and that changed things. I imagined I was going to be in the desert at night, filming wild animals trying to cross and migrate. That couldn't happen. The border situation was very tough between El Paso and Juarez, so I could travel to Juarez but not cross to El Paso, and that made the whole research a little bit remote.
And that was specifically related to COVID, right? So,
Yeah, the pandemic was a thing that interrupted the process, but I don't see that as an obstacle, but just a change of direction. Then I ended up communicating with people that had information about, for example, the water supply in the area, animals, the migratory status of different species, because that's, I think, a key point in this research, that I'm not approaching migration only concerning human beings, but migration as a natural process, and at the end also human migration was very much the beginning of all civilizations. So it seems that by stopping migration and generating all the rhetoric of hatred and separation, it's anti-civilization. So for me it was very basic to address this natural process that includes all species. Yeah. And then the best part was to end up doing this research in Juarez and El Paso, because of the network there is already very integrated to their daily life. Like, for example, the bakery Resiste, that we have an example here of the mural cookie piece. Oh. Hello. That's Edgar, and he's from Juarez, and he's also a key person in the whole process. And yeah, at the end, even within this complex situation of the pandemic, new to all of us, maybe predictable, we ended up finding a network of people to collaborate. One important thing is that for me, research is not only going through websites or documents or the historical information. For me, research is very much going to meet people and talk to them and use their local experience and their eyes also to see the context, how they see it, how they have experienced it, because it's also a big responsibility to try to develop a project when you are not from that place. No, I've been very new to the border area. Maybe 10 years ago, I had one first experience. I really asked to go and see the Rio Grande, the Rio Bravo area, and I ended up crossing the Rio Grande, but migrating from the US to Mexico. So I did that crossing and then I crossed back, and for me it was really liberating to see that that area was very much an ecosystem and not the political imaginary that we all have connected to violence and repression and this very mediatic image of the border. That exists. It's very cruel. It's horrible. But I realized that the most powerful thing was nature itself. And that's probably the beginning of this project, realizing that there is an ecosystem and then finding also the social network and the social ecosystem in populated areas like Juarez and El Paso, and the history between both cities was really relevant. So it was challenging not being able to travel as I had planned, but meeting the really nice and knowledgeable people in both sides of the border was a big thing for me. So yeah, we can continue.
So I want to just pick up on a few of the things that you said. Initially when we started this project, it was pre-COVID, and so we imagined this project where Minerva could be moving physically back and forth across the border. She had an interest in sort of setting up this kind of natural migratory pattern in contrast to the sort of truncated migration that happens with international policy, particularly in neoliberalism and post-NAFTA. And we thought that would be a very fluid process as we, at that time, moved very freely back and forth across the border. And as many of you might know, during COVID and during the pandemic, the borders were essentially closed, really. So U.S. citizens could still move back and forth, but people who had visas to move back and forth between Mexico and the United States, people who came for touristic reasons or research reasons or other things, were totally prevented from moving across land borders. And so that was a very big change to our project. One of the things I want to say is an institution that at the US-Mexico border that produces a lot of projects on the border, some of the best projects that we've produced over the years have been those projects that have run up against the wall of border policy. So, and this was the case here as well. So, we had this idea of this fluid moving back and forth, but when we couldn't move back and forth, Minerva's project became not just a conversation about natural migration, but a conversation about what happens when that gets stopped or truncated, or, it became a very real reflection of what happens in that very moment in time. So we could bring Minerva up from Mexico City to do work in Juarez. She couldn't walk across the border. She could fly back to Mexico City, fly into Dallas, and then fly into El Paso again. So it changed the whole dynamic of the project, but what I think it also did was it made a project that was very reflective of a very particular moment in time. And so that's something I just kind of wanted to call attention to. And the other thing that you said that I'd just like to kind of draw out a little bit more is the fact that we work a lot with artists from all over the world who want to do projects about the border, but their understanding of the border comes from a mediated understanding of the border, which is something that you mentioned. So we are constantly working with that or against that or within that, to create projects that give a more realistic aspect of what's happening at the border. But, most people, when they understand the US-Mexico border, understand it from, national news reports or things that they've read or fiction or all these other things, and they understand the border as being this very violent place, this very unwelcoming place. The story that we hear in the media here in the United States a lot of time is that the US is rejecting migrants and that migrants come up to the border and they find this unfriendly environment on both sides of the border. And so Minerva's project, because it's built on relations rather than sort of mediated tropes of the border, broke up that idea quite a lot. And I think that's really an important aspect of her work, is to take a place and go beyond sort of like the kind of agreed upon concept of that place and find something different. So we ended up basing a lot of our work in Juarez because of that particular situation we had at that moment in time. She wasn't able to move back and forth, so she concentrated the work in Juarez. And Juarez, I think, for many people, you say that word alone, and I have to say Albuquerque is not that different thanks to Breaking Bad. Like, you know what I mean? We know what that experience is like to have a fictional narrative define who we are as people. You know, and I hope I'm not overstepping by saying that, but Minerva, you know, came up to Juarez and began to kind of unearth what was really happening there. So I'm hoping you can maybe talk to us a little bit about you're working with the sort of effective networks that were operating in Juarez and the people who were receiving migrants and the way that sort of challenged our understanding of what Juarez is. And I hope you can also weave into that the glassworks here in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think because of the general idea of Juarez as a violent city and the contemporary approach to Juarez, it was a challenge to find very intuitive, because I trust a lot my intuition to maybe compare contexts or compare social situations to find what was the real Juarez. It wasn't that difficult. It was a challenge at the beginning because my expectation was very much camping in the desert and then filming at night, animals crossing the border, something like that. But then facing this pandemic situation, it was very much okay. Let's talk to people and let's see how they see the common migration context, because at the end I wasn't that much interested in the border issue, but more what's the Chihuahuan desert. No, for me it was more an environment to get to know, and also the people that is there, living there all the time. So luckily it was easier to find also the historical roots of creative processes and examples of glass works that you see here, the blown, how do you call it in English? Vidrio soplado.
Blown glass.
Blown glass. It comes from a factory in Juarez in the 1960s that made Juarez also a city to visit as a touristic spot. So very different from the idea that we have from Juarez at this moment. So that also made me reflect on the fact that, okay, if Juarez was such a beautiful touristic city, that means that maybe we can go backwards and change the situation. I'm talking very much about the social situation of Juarez, that now it's recognized as a violent or a city that is very much linked to border conflicts. So I think it's very important to keep in mind the historical factors of these cities and situations, but also the main thing was to connect to the network of people that could still recognize this positive social situation in the city and that have integrated into their lives a good power to react to situations we don't like or that we don't agree with or that seem unfair. So it seems more natural in such an environment, and very naturally you find these networks in Juarez that know each other, either if it's an autonomous independent space or an organization that is already internationally working with migration issues or asylum seekers. So for me, yeah, basically the research is meeting these people, seeing through their own eyes and getting the information through them. For me, research is not just going through the internet or documents. It's very much meeting that people, and also talking with Kerry, that has a big experience between both cities and knows very well the situation with migrants, was a key element.
I think that's a great point to kind of ask you about something that I'd like to sort of flesh out a little bit right now, and that's the relationship between contemporary art and activism. So one of the things that I have always admired about your work from afar is the way that you balance registering at an extremely important level in the international contemporary art world. So I think your work has visual weight and sort of a contemporary context in the conversation of international contemporary art, but at the same time, under the surface, and I think it's visible in some of the writing about your work, in some of the ways that people have kind of critiqued your work over time, there's this tremendously powerful force that has nothing at all to do about the art world or the art market or these conversations. And so you're driven by this ethics, and I'm going to try some words on for it because it's not that easy for me to talk about it. Ethics of relationships, ethics of context of place, ethics of activist networks, of responding to kind of real situations. I know it's a crazily broad question, but can you talk to us a little bit about the relationship between contemporary art and the way that it judges value and the work that you do at another level with sort of entering into relationship with people and trying to kind of tease out the context of a particular place that you're working in? So,
well, yeah. Social related projects, people that is interested in contemporary art, they lose interest when I start getting complex about social situations. For example, I've worked with community radio, and that links to repression and very concrete social situations in rural areas. So once you trespass that border, that's a real border, they lose interest. And I think for me, it's easy to navigate within the contemporary art world, and also my interest in politics and social issues, because I was very much born from a family that came from an indigenous area in Mexico, migrated to Mexico City. My father is a very engaged person in social issues. Probably I was raised with that kind of education. But then I think whenever you're proposing a political project or social project, you need to resist in many different levels. And for me also, setting an example in institutions is part of my resistance. No? So yeah, maybe I know about social issues, but also in the place where I end up working, I need to resist certain situations or promote certain situations, because I know there are artists that come later and will find maybe a better situation in that kind of environment. The link between art and activism is tricky, because first of all, activism is a word that is very new to name a social struggle. So in my position, I'm more linked to very historical social struggle, including women's social struggle, that we don't even have to name feminism. No, because all rural women have been there fighting for many different kinds of rights for centuries. So all these terms are new, and I think I'm very conscious of the real link, which is human, social, doesn't matter what kind of name someone gives them at certain point. Now there are new words to call activists, like woke people. That's so strange to me. That's very strange. So I prefer to stay with my connection to social struggle in general, historical one. Also, democracy is another tricky word, no? Because recently all political moves are somehow generated in name of democracy, and at the end they end up being repressive or just following the same kind of repressive laws. So yeah, I'm very cautious with those kind of terms, but yeah, I would agree that it's connected to ethics and a very specific motivation, which is generating something that is aesthetically strategic and that is for positive social change.
I wanted to take us back to something very pragmatic again. It's sort of like, how did the individual pieces in this exhibition come to be? And so I'm going to call some of them out, like the mural, which follows like a trajectory that you have in your work of engaging local muralists in the creation of work. We have all of these contributions of people who participated in the first version of the migratory yellow pages, and then additional versions that were organized by Viola here from 516. The cookie sculpture by George, and even the frameworks that the works are presented on. Can you tell me a little bit how you work in collaboration with other artists and how that sort of manifested in the show that we see here tonight?
Yeah, well, I don't see them as collaborations. They're very much invitations. There's people I trust with their aesthetics and artistic work. Probably it's very special to talk about George and the whole structure around the bakery.
Will you talk about that, please? I think
yes,
it'd be nice
yes,
to talk about
yes.
that.
So I think I already mentioned that this bakery is next to the workshop they also use to produce graphic works. They are all the time struggling to get the funding to keep both things alive, not both the bakery and the printing shop. It's usually social content, whatever you see on their engravings or the kind of graphic they produce. But anyway, they collaborate with refugee centers, and also in Juarez there was a very specific moment during the pandemic that there were new spaces only to receive and welcome people that might be ill with COVID. So there were specific cases of hotels transformed into refugees for these people, and they are collaborating all the time with the migrants in that sense. So that's what I mean with this, just integrating this into their daily lives. No, it's not a special project about migrant people. It's just, well, they contribute and help if they can. So for me, it was a great example. Another one was the movies, shoes, toys for children. They can only take one per child because children can be very greedy. It's beautiful, it's beautiful. And one of the first ideas I had when I was there was maybe to install a free public phone for migrants to communicate between Juarez and El Paso. But then I found out that this free shop had already a telephone that they could just lend to migrants and say, okay, let's go back. That's not necessary. Let's integrate the free shop into the Yellow Pages book, and let's just promote that project a little bit. But yeah, I think the example of the bakery, it's a very special one because it integrates everything, an economic project, a cultural project, and also a situation where they acknowledge very much the context and how they can provide a little bit of help, even though they also need help. It's like, okay, we are also contributing.
So for my final question, I want to talk a little bit about context. So I want to talk about the context of the show here in Albuquerque. And then I also want to kind of make transparent the context. I mean, like the fact that the show first sort of premiered in El Paso, it's still a different context than Juarez, where most of the conversations happened and the connections happened. So that's a context. Those are two separate contexts, Juarez and El Paso. But as you thought about having the show being exhibited here, what were some of the issues that came up for you? What were some of the things that you felt were priorities? What were some of the considerations about moving the show from the border to Albuquerque?
Well, I think there is something universal, which is solidarity. And it was interesting to also make the similar call from for projects or graphic elements that could be integrated into a new Yellow Pages book, but also it's a very different situation between a border city and maybe a city that has a very important Latino or Spanish-speaking community. So I'm still trying to find out like what was the balance between both situations. But I think the common thing is that, okay, there is, it's universal. There is people that cares in all these places, and that needs to be encouraged. And I think whatever, if there is anything that can stop capitalism or this individualistic approach in society, is just generating community, and that's universal. And that's why I didn't doubt that the show could travel to another city. And also there is a big connection between both institutions, both Rubin and 516. So I thought, okay, this is the right situation to travel the show. It was great to receive so much new graphic production for the new or local Yellow Pages book. So yeah, it's always an experiment, and I'm guided by intuition, but I think it worked.
I agree, 100%. So I would like to open up to a conversation now, but I'd like to kind of start without maybe putting Edgar on the spot. We have Edgar Picasso Moreno here, who was a really important collaborator in this whole project. A lot of the things we do at the Rubin Center, and I think it's somewhat true with Minerva's work too, we look for local collaborators that can bring a different context to the project. And so, so we worked with Edgar in reaching out to refugee organizations, but also in participating with local artists. You don't have to speak right now, but if you'd like to give a local perspective on the project and how that kind of came about, I'd welcome that. And at the same time, I would welcome the audience to think about any questions you might have for Minerva or any comments you'd like to make about the project being here at 516. So just kind of opening up that conversation.
No, I'm okay. Well, I'm going to be in a conversation next month here, so I'm not going to have...
Yeah. Awkward. Edward's saying no, thank you. Edgar is going to be here giving a presentation on November 16th, is that correct? Along with Rebecca Schreider, who's also here today, and I cannot remember who else. Wanda Estrada Hernandez, who's both in this project and also in this wonderful show created by Rochelle Pablo upstairs, so yeah. But if there's any questions or comments that you'd like to direct to Minerva or Suzanne or myself, we'd welcome those now. Aaron, raise your hand. Aaron, yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, I have some candies for you. Because this works so well, and I was so happy that you're a dog person. I'm a dog person. He even got a puppy working with him during the painting of the mural. But no, of course, I can see the dedication. It's not easy. I wasn't here during the the production of the mural. So I trust totally the local artist and production. I think that's part of the experience of working with other artists. As I say, I don't consider it as a collaboration, but it's their own work, their own expertise. And no, thanks so much for the great job you did. Yeah, I love to work with people that cares about their own production, but also that can produce something as beautiful as this. Is a bit different from the first mural, because we had two very similar walls to work, one next to the other, like in an angle. So here it was interesting to find a way to combine this idea of the, how could I call it? It's very much an abstraction of the border. The green, bluish area is, of course, the Rio Grande water. The rusty color is the wall, the sand, of course, the animals that are transiting between the border. And usually I work with characters from comic books or related to Disney and very well-known productions, like comic strip productions, because comics have been used since always for indoctrination even, or yeah, just as a channel for ideologies in many different ways. So if they have been used as political tools, I'm approaching them in the same way. I also think that companies, either when I work with branding or these very well-known characters, I think I'm very much using our own hard drives, our RAM memory. You know, our visual memory is already taken by all these companies. No, we store logos, we store all these imaginary situations that I think it's right to use them back and say something that is at the end social. So yeah, I don't consider it as collaboration, but very much recognizing all this creativity, local energy that is everywhere.
The rock is new. Do you want to talk about that?
The rock?
Oh, is that a rock?
Yes, yes, it's a rock. Aaron, is it a rock?
I hope so.
Do either one of you want to talk about that? Because that's just a new
It's
addition.
a weird looking duck.
Or Erin, maybe you want to have a few words about sort of executing this mural that was, you know, this kind of long distance collaboration between the two of you. Not a collaboration, collaboration.
Obviously, thank you, Minerva and Taiwan Center for letting me do this. It was a lot of fun. I think the thing that was really neat, as you're bringing up, since it's on multiple different walls, like I think definitely when you come in, when you stand in the back, the vanishing point that these lines make kind of straight in front of us are really nice because they're even, so it's kind of a cool vanishing point in the front. It kind of puts you into the little area. It's really neat. And then I think it was fun getting to use the different walls, like having the far back wall, like there's a bird up top, so it's like the birds are kind of all around us, you know. So yeah, so I think there's a, and then the other thing that was really enjoyable with this design that you created is the characters, like there's the styles are different, so stylistically it's kind of fun because there's definitely the Disney characters are flat, and then the you know, like the different shapes and stuff are more painterly. I actually went back to kind of rewatch Bambi because I hadn't seen these characters in a while, and I was like, is this really how this is? So it's kind of neat to see, even in that movie, that the characters are flat, and then the surrounding areas are very stylistic. And so I guess from an artistic perspective, there's a lot of it was very fun getting to paint it, so thank you for allowing me to be a part of the process.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, but that's true. There is the abstract section, the realistic section, the comic strip section of the elements. Yeah.
Question. Why were these particular animals chosen, the cartoon animals? Did they represent anything symbolically?
Well, it was very much of the emotions and situations I could see in the original movie. For example, Flower, the skunk, she's saying this could even happen. What's the English
This could
word?
even happen to you.
This
yeah.
could even happen to you. So it also relates to the border. No, the more we build or attempt to build separation, it's going to affect all of us, and it's already affecting. It's not a situation that is Mexico, U.S. There are many border situations that, in fact, are not connected to nationalities or racism. It's very much an economic situation. No, it's about natural resources, and if you sum that with the crisis we have connected to climate change, and we are seeing so many different catastrophes in the world, not only the new hurricane destruction. It's like it has been happening already for many years. So the more we are divided, the less we are able to survive as a species, because there comes a migration, climate migration. No, if this area is flooded, where are we going to go? No, and if it's another country, well, we need to go there. So yeah, at the end, I think it's just common sense. No, and it seems that all the politics nowadays are against this common sense of us as humans surviving. It doesn't matter which nationality we are.
I was just going to mention, we've mentioned this a couple of times, but maybe haven't totally explained the process, but we did this exhibition in El Paso, Texas, but in conjunction with the exhibition, we produced this migratory yellow pages, which was an invitation to artists from Mexico and the United States and beyond to contribute artworks for people in migration. We worked with scientists and botanists and other people to talk about the actual physical landscape of migration. We work with refugee shelters in Juarez to find out information for migrants. And again, I'm going to call somebody out to see if someone else will respond to me. It hasn't worked well so far, but that's fine. Just joking. But Viola, you worked on the migratory yellow pages here in Albuquerque. We thought it was important to do a different version here for this different context. Would you be willing to say a little bit about that process, if it's not too awkward?
Hi. I'm Viola, and when we start the conversation of bringing this exhibition here, we all think that bringing the yellow pages or bringing is not the right word, but I wasn't ready. Okay.
Sorry, it's totally unfair, but I do think it's relevant. And so, the yellow pages for us were not a part of the exhibition. They actually didn't show up in the exhibition at all, but they were an important, I don't even want to say an important side project, because I feel in some ways it was the central project to actually invite people to think about these effective communities, to think about how they wanted to respond to people in migration. So if you as you're looking around at the show, you'll actually see the version that we produced here. That version, 1,000 copies were distributed to refugee organizations in Juarez. None went to the art world. I have a slight bit of pride on that one, they went just to the refugees. But it was a separate project. But this idea was that this exhibition about looking at these relationships would also have some sort of real world project. And 516, they were willing to take it on, and Viola took the lead on that. So when you think about the refugee experience here in Albuquerque or looking for those connections, how was that for you?
I think that, as you say, the real world kind of component of this exhibition, we wanted to bring there. And we're also going to print 500 copies that we're also going to distribute. But then starting the work itself, as Minerva was saying, I think the first phase was really just understanding Albuquerque in the light and talking with people, meeting with organizations. That was actually very exciting, and we created a lot of interesting conversation, and we're already thinking with some organization to continue working, to creating events later on in the fall, to really continue this. I always tell the people I talk with, like, this publication is a first step to continue, like, tell us what you need, tell us how we can amplify your work. It's definitely a partial work. The copies here is a draft, it's not finished. It takes, maybe you underestimate the time. There was, time management was definitely something to work on, but definitely see all this richness. And sometimes I think that's also so important. There's so much happening around you, and once you move a rock, you start seeing a lot more, and I think that's something that I personally will carry on with. And yeah, so we're excited about this, and definitely, as Minerva was saying, at least the conversations I had are for not necessarily people crossing the border, but maybe people that crossed the border a few years past. Yeah, that was my experience with that.
Thanks so much. Sorry to put you on the spot, but feel free to, Rebecca, please, yeah.
I just take my here. So just kind of following up from what Viola was saying about bringing the exhibition here, I wondered, Minerva, whether you would consider bringing the exhibition to other places in the Southwest. I mean, it seems like,
or Martha's Vineyard, right?
The exhibition, the yellow pages, I mean, it's a way of making these kind of connections in cities that are receiving asylum seekers and or that have long histories of supporting immigrants. And so this is exhibition 2, and I wonder, like, at ASU or somewhere in Arizona, I don't know whether you would consider that. And I should say, I say this as someone who's a big fan of the show, and I was so excited to see it in El Paso, and I'm really excited to see it here.
I'm just going to say before I pass the microphone, or other places like Martha's Vineyard, like we talked about this morning. Like there are other places it might go. So
let's put it on a plane.
No, I would be, of course, super happy, and I don't even consider it my show. No, that's the thing with the strategy for the Yellow Pages book, that giving the very fertile context of Juarez, I know there's people that can just adopt the project and have a yearly Yellow Pages. And I mean, I will help and contribute as much as I'm needed, but the ideal situation is very much them just continuing with the Yellow Pages, because they are the ones judging firsthand the context where they are seeing these situations happening. Also, a big thing was to kind of evaluate every project or institution that was out there saying we work for migrants, because also there is very, how do you call them, obscure situations, let's say, because also, I mean, migration is such a big issue that also attracts money, and funding that might be misdirected. So it was, okay, we trust this organization. Have they had any problem or situation related to abuse? Then we basically don't include that one, no? And as I said, it's not just going online and trying to research these things, because it doesn't work like that, no? The situation in the real migrant path or experience, yeah, it's very different, no, and it's very abusive. So yeah, we tried also to filter that through a network of people. No, I'm not the person that can judge all of that, but it's this network of people, and Juarez was a great place to do that. Yeah, at the same time, it's building friendships around. And for me, that was the most enjoyable thing to see. You know, it doesn't matter if one is an organization, another one is another independent space. They are friends. They meet in the local market every Sunday, and they know each other. And that's what I mean with network and community. And that would be the people I trust, no, to judge the content of this kind of book, because it's also a big responsibility. No? For example, there is a section that talks about the plants that are edible in the Chihuahuan desert and the ones that might be dangerous, or the ones that are medicinal. So that kind of content can be even dangerous for someone's life. No? So yeah, for me it's very delicate content, and that can be only filtered through a network of people. No? Can judge it. But I would be totally happy to travel let's say the strategy or the show somewhere else.
I'm going to try to kind of phrase a question as best I can, but just based on everything you're talking about, migration and changes, one thing that really I draw a connection to is the homeless population here and how they can be considered a new definition of migrant or refugee, because a lot of the homeless population happens to be from out of state. So if this is something that moves to different places around the Southwest, would that be a way to speak to those populations? So the definition of immigrante or migrants, not necessarily just people crossing national borders, but state borders, or even people that are fleeing some of these climate crises. I was seeing a lot of, I drove in from Santa Fe, saw a lot of Florida plates on the way out here. So I was like, you tend to think of like, well, what are those changes really looking, and not only defining what the term refugee means, because there's people fleeing climate crises or catastrophic events, but would that be something to make it more universal, or what would that lend it to if it does become a show that goes across like the Southwest, because it could change the definition of some of those things, not necessarily just like people coming from Mexico, Central America, but more so people crossing borders within the U.S.
Yeah, that's true. I think that connects to something I was telling Kerry earlier, that at the end, we shouldn't try to simplify things, because it's a very complex situation. Almost every single person is a different situation in terms of migration, and that's one of the factors that also should get included. No, like what's a safe shelter to go to? No, it doesn't matter if it's because you are Mexican or you are from the U.S., you come from another state. It's like, what's the safe place to go to? So, of course, that can grow and grow, but yeah, we shouldn't see it as a simplified situation and just name migrants, refugees, and no, it's very complex. No, sometimes, or the case between Juarez and El Paso, it's like it's a family that basically lives in both cities, and some are not allowed to go to the other side of the border, but they live a common life. No, it's a family divided. Yeah, in that specific case, I wouldn't say it's two different cities. No, it's like one social environment between both of them. Do you want to add something?
I think if there's not any other sort of compelling questions right now, and we really want to invite you to ask us questions, ask Viola questions, ask Edgar questions, Suzanne questions. I'd like to end on the theme of complexity, especially in relation to contemporary arts organizations that are engaging with these kinds of theories. Earlier today, I had a conversation with Rebecca Schreiber, who is a researcher in both visual culture and immigration. And she asked me a question that I think is really important, but I didn't have an answer to. So her question was, how are you tracking how these books, these yellow pages, I don't have one in front of me right now, these yellow pages are being used by refugees and migrants and whether they had an impact or not? It's such a good question, but it's so far from where our arts institutions are able to respond. So I consider the Rubin Center, here's Exhibit A, thank you. But I consider the Rubin Center to be like a very socially engaged institution. I think 516 is as well. And we might be set up to do a project like this in a way that I consider to be fundamentally ethical, although problematic in its path, but fundamentally ethical in terms of our engagement with refugees and migrants, with the local artist community. But when you actually want to get to the point of whether or not we can track if these booklets had a real impact, we're light years away from being set up from something like that. At the same time, I can say, like, we can't answer that question. That's not part of our plans. We don't have the staff to do that, the vision to do that, the ability to do that. Nonetheless, I still think it's really valuable that we're engaging into these, engaging in these conversations and getting into this complexity. We're not doing it perfectly, but I think that the fact that we can't do it perfectly, or the fact that the ethics of contemporary art and the ethics of community practices or being in relationship with communities in migration, they don't always intersect. Our structures don't intersect, our goals don't intersect. It's still important to continue to engage. And each time that we engage and each time that we hit against the complexities or the ways that we can't meet up to the expectations of one community or another, it pushes us a little bit farther to being institutions that are truly responsive to the communities we live in. And so I think that complexity is something that a lot of people shy away from. They like to be able to tick the boxes of, like, these are the goals and these are the things that we did. But living in that complexity and the ambiguity of whether or not we've hit the social goals or the contemporary art goals, I think are what makes us exciting institutions. And I think working with artists like Minerva, who push us and challenge us and call us out, that's exactly where we want to be. So I'd like to just kind of end on that note and say thank you again to Minerva. It was such a pleasure to work with. And yeah, of course.
Yeah, I will just add something in connection to that, and it's that, for example, a difference between activism and art is that activism has a very specific goal. You can measure it, and many other practices also have the scientific method, and you can rate success. And one of the good things about art is not only the freedom to be creative, generate projects, but also the freedom that you don't have to have these kind of measurements. And well, apart from saying that, is like, I would say that that doesn't mean that culture and art doesn't generate an impact in society. It does. I totally trust that. But it's not measurable in the scientific ways or the NGO ways or the activist way or the electoral politics way. No, it's not a percentage, but it's there. And I can say that now after some projects that have lasted 20 years, either through the feedback or either through seeing how younger artists adopt the same kind of strategies and tactics for contemporary art. It's like, okay, there is some influence, there is some impact. It doesn't matter if you can track it or measure it, but you see it there. But it takes time. It takes decades. And it's very enjoyable once that happens, and maybe Some projects get totally autonomous from me as an author because I'm not so interested in that. We all have egos, but I'm not interested in saying, okay, that was my project and I'm the only one that can execute it. No, it's a social strategy. So if I'm not around, please you do it and anyone. No? So it's liberating also, not having to measure success because that belongs to another set of professions and way of seeing life. No? But yeah, art has an impact in culture, and culture builds, or it's a big part of society at the end.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.